Support for this episode of the PowerCast comes from Mark Bell's Slingshot. Check out the all-new website at howmuchyoubench.net. Bench heavy with no pain with Mark Bell's Slingshot. Apparel for strong people from our friends at 8manstrong.com. NaturalOrganics.com, the official home of Urban Ice Organics Kratom. Keep your mind and body synchronized. Head over to NaturalOrganics.com. That's NaturalOrganix.com. And Bodybuilding.com. Bodybuilding.com is the world's #1 fitness website and supplement store. Bodybuilding.com has free fitness plans for every fitness level. Visit Bodybuilding.com today to become your best self. So this is part 2 of our 2-part episode with James the Thinker Smith. Could see from some of the YouTube comments that not everybody got James because they thought maybe he was searching for the way to sound pretentious, and that's just how he sounds. He's not intending to be pretentious or anything else. That's just he's trying to be exact in his language, and you would have a hard time arguing that that's not the way he was being. Got a tweet from someone who listened to the show. This is Martin Gomez. He is at Mark_5209, and he said, "I can't wait. What he said about the factors of athleticism being spatial awareness, etc., changed my views on coaching." If we get one response like that, it means that a whole lot of other people felt the same way, and the detractors don't really matter that much. So in this episode, we talked more about the strength aerobics approach that James is using to help Mark finally rehab some of his injury problems, and it's definitely worth a listen, especially for those of you who got your thinking caps on. Like this video and share it and subscribe to this channel, and we'd appreciate it, and thanks.
Recorded live at Super Training Gym in West Sacramento, California, this is Mark Bell's PowerCast. Alongside Silent Mike and Jim McD, here's your host, Mark Bell.
So you mentioned physics before when we were talking about powerlifting or strength coaches in general. Can you give us a couple areas that you think, because I don't even know who the hell listens to this thing. A lot of people do, so a lot of a variety of people, but let's just say they're mostly powerlifters or gym rats, right? Barbell, dumbbell type action. What are 2 or 3 areas that maybe people think you should, that you believe that they should look deeper into to improve their training, physique, and strength and performance in the gym?
So specifically in the context of the performance of movement, I would always go to classical mechanics, which is the realm of physics study that applies to most of what anyone day to day deals with in terms of the motion of bodies that are not on the subatomic level or moving close to the speed of light.
Yeah. So you're talking about better positioning and maybe the squat, bench, or deadlift.
So in where that comes from is, well, what does that mean? Is someone regurgitating some mechanical bench press cue because Mark Bell said it? Or because it's unequivocally true according to what we know about classical mechanics and lever systems, etc.? And in my view, there's an important distinction to be made, because if in fact Mark Bell saying it is aligned with the mechanical truth, then it's fantastic, because there's this broad audience of individuals who have a delivery system that's coming from the unequivocal truth. Alternatively, who someone deems as an information source, if it happens to be success in spite of a lack of knowledge, which there's in every sport it exists, all we have to do is think of, relative to your question, if you can find one world-class powerlifter who is irrefutably not knowledgeable, yet really strong, then that's explaining my argument of the damaging possibilities of that person being given a microphone and influencing who knows how many people.
Right. We've talked about that, and I actually think it's more so prominent in powerlifting than other sports, because perhaps the performance-enhancing drugs aspect, plus the kind of brute strength aspect of powerlifting, that you get guys that aren't technically sound or knowledgeable in programming that excel, opposed to a sport, maybe, I don't know, archery or something, right, where it's more skill-based rather than this brute strength side.
You'd actually be surprised that it's not necessarily correct.
You think it's just the case? This is obviously 100% observation, but my example always is a jump shooter in basketball. There's very few top NBA basketball jump shooters through history that I've seen. Obviously, observation. This isn't a survey. This isn't anything fancy. That have poor technically in terms of form and shooting, compared to a powerlifter that pulls 700 pounds.
So let me answer it this way, using the basketball example.
Yeah.
Because the amazing Steph Curry and his irrefutable technical prowess as a result of his technical consistency with shooting these 30-foot three-pointers. It's sort of it's been a paradigm shift in the landscape of what the future of shooters will look like. The interesting thing is, a far greater percentage of the population can propel a basketball from the same distance from the hoop as Steph Curry via a number of inefficient means.
Throwing it like a football, throwing it underhand, something like
granny style.
Then can pull a 700-pound barbell off the floor. There's only so many ways one individual can pull a 700-pound barbell off the floor. And so therefore, the amount of reasons that would fall in the in spite of versus because of are far more vast
practice or
when something like shooting a ball is, because say for whatever set of reasons you become relatively efficient at throwing the ball against your forehead and it rebounds and goes in the hoop.
Yeah.
And you say, look, I'm 60% from the free throw line by doing this. Prove to me that this is an unwise course of action for all shooters to adopt into their acumen. Who's going to refute that and why? Versus there's not so many ways that even someone who can pull a 700-pound barbell off the floor, Mark can't walk in and say, now I'm going to do it with my ankle, and now I'm going to do it with my arms over here. And so even though the consequences are more severe if you do it wrong in terms of structural injury, there's only so many ways you can do it. And so the pure output events in which powerlifting is one, sprinting, jumping, throwing, swimming, canoe, kayak, ice skating, anything where it's an ultimate exertion to either overcome load or distance or velocity, are very easily measurable in terms of the final result. And so for that reason, there's more objective information available to determine, or rather to measure the intelligence going into preparatory schemes in these more singular events than it is the dynamic situation of team and combat sports, where it's absolutely measurable, but not as unitarily simplified as just squat, bench, and deadlift, and that's the competition.
I may be wrong again by definition or whatever. This is just in my head. You get a skill, or there's a proper technique in every thing that we do. But once again, I don't know the exact definition, but in my head, it would be proficiency and consistency. Right? Those are two factors why a jump shooter shoots the way they do, compared to bouncing it off your head or drop kicking it. And what I have noticed, once again, 100% random survey of my face and Instagram and YouTube, is that these top lifters, many of them, don't have either of those. They don't have a proficiency or a consistency in their deadlift, whereas Steph Curry does, opposed to this bounce off your head method that your argument was practice. Correct? If I bounce it off my head for 10 years straight, 100 jump shots a day, that's where your argument would come.
Is that I can be ultimately proficient and consistent.
Doing that
through repetition that is targeted towards this specific thing. And here's an example. I wrote an article a couple years ago titled "Because of or in Spite of" that sort of addresses this very topic. Say I have you walk right here, 10 paces from that camera stand to that camera stand, but only on your heels. And then you do it. And then I say, Mike, did you walk from that stand to that stand because of or in spite of the fact that you were only on your heels? Well, the interesting thing is, the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, well, you did take 10 paces on your heels.
We got music going on, Jim. Sounds like porno music.
It's because this is such a dramatic and relevant concept that I'm discussing that it necessitates the soundtrack.
Mood.
So you walk those 10 paces because of or in spite of.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, it actually requires, in this case, knowledge of the biomechanics of walking to provide context. Well, let's look at the answer to that question. Is there a more efficient way to walk from there to there? Less structural impact, greater economical use of energy? Well, in that case, it was in spite of the fact.
Yeah.
But if it was simply get from point A to point B without any other set of circumstances, it was because of.
I feel like, in a dumb way, that's what I was talking about, the shooting and deadlifting.
Well, I think, Mike is bringing up a point that you and I have discussed quite a bit too, where, and it's very general. It's a generalization because some people treat themselves differently than others. But what you and I have been talking about is trying to treat yourself like a professional. And so what Mike is probably referring to in some cases is that the NBA guy who has a good outside shot, who's been in the league for 5 or 6 years, is probably treating himself better than a Neanderthal powerlifter.
In many ways.
Who's kind of just randomly going in there and not really thinking about it a ton and just yanking up 700 pounds.
Yeah, because Curry has at least put in the thought and years, right, this thing to gain knowledge to become proficient and consistent in his jumper.
Now,
where these powerlifters go into the gym and just thrash themselves and they get results. Right, this is obviously general, like Mark said, generally, I can't put my head in these other powerlifters' heads, but they're just going in there and they're doing 5x5 for 10 years, and because of perhaps performance-enhancing performance-enhancing drugs, genetics, and hard work, that they get these results, whereas it's not despite, in spite, whatever, right?
I agree, and I agree, and I would say that I think many people would be interested, perhaps surprised, by the knowledge that many athletes in many different sports fulfill the description that you just gave.
Yeah.
Right.
And
they're eating McDonald's and not taking care of their bodies and so on.
And because of genetics and the conviction to work diligently, that combination alone.
That's actually a good way of putting it, because I think that people think that hard work replaces all that, but like being diligent and being consistent, all these little like bullshit things that you've given me, which I would consider to be bullshit because I don't like doing them, but they are of tremendous value, obviously, otherwise there would be no point in doing them. But these little things that I'm doing are like tedious, but to recognize that that's going to get you to the end result that you're looking for is not always an easy thing to do. Your first question to me, the whole reason why we're together and the whole reason why we're doing this podcast is, I tore my pec, and I said, I need to find, I've gone to some nerds before, but I need to find the biggest nerd of them all. And,
the Lord of the Nerds.
And in discussions with Chad Wesley Smith, who's been really instrumental in me benching 578 and me having a nice crack at the 600 that I tried in November, he's mentioned to me many times that working with you was like the greatest internship he could ever have. And so I was like, well, shit, I've known James forever. I might as well hit him up and see what he has to say. And the first thing that you said to me was, when's the last time that you just took off of training? Like, was there any times where you stopped and it just, other than being injured, there hasn't really been, other than falling with 1,085, which just took a few weeks to recover from. There has not been any pause in training at all. And you said, okay, well, the next month you're not taking off, but you're going to be lifting a barbell, and you're going to be lifting things differently. You're going to be lifting things slower, and you're going to be using 30% of your max, and so on. And so to take these steps back, it has been feeling good, and it feels like it's already. I feel like I'm already making some progress, and the pec is starting to heal up rapidly, which is cool. But I think a lot of times when it comes to the consistency of staying hydrated and the consistency of feeding yourself properly and stretching properly and using a stim unit and so on and so forth down the line is when you start to really separate out the true professionals from the amateurs.
I agree. And what's important to, in my judgment as a viewer, to take from that, again, is I'm always reiterating this notion of attempting to minimize the difference between all that is knowable and all that is known about the subject matter. And as it comes to the context of professionalism, a model is created in anything. When we're looking at aeronautical engineering or a performance model for sports, by looking at the existing set of high-performance entities and determining what they share in common. Not what they do differently, but what they share in common. And then as you begin to assemble the commonalities shared between this elite domain of the high performers, you begin to assemble a model. Okay, what we found is statistically the commonality shared between all these particular type of wing constructions in aeronautics or sports preparation is these 7 things. So clearly that's something of relevance to pay attention to. So as it pertains to professionalism, well, why do we use that word, professional? What does it mean? What do individuals have in common that are the most successful at any particular discipline? And what are they doing differently than people who aren't operating at that level?
Yeah, making it a hobby or whatever.
So the things that I was explaining with Mark are that there's no plausible reason why Mark should not be taking and utilizing the resources that he has available to minimize the difference between all that is knowable and what is known regarding how he can successfully rehabilitate, ultimately achieve the goal, perhaps do so in a way that hasn't been done before that will yield more consistent.
What's been great about it is you're showing me a new way, because I kind of feel like in a lot of ways that I have been putting in a good effort, but the effort could obviously be better. And there's still more things that I can do, and there's more things. It's easy to kind of say, "Oh fuck, man, I don't want to get into like doing all this different shit because I'm going to start to run short on time or whatever." But those are just excuses that aren't going to really lead to the result you're looking for.
Well, and it comes back to what importance are you placing on the objective? Is it?
Do you really care about it, or only sort of?
Because even though powerlifting doesn't have the global notoriety of the 100 meters in track and field or the NBA or the NFL, in the domain, you represent the absolute elite, the top 1%, particularly if you look at the bench press. Right. So in principle, there's nothing controversial about saying Steph Curry in shooting point guards and Larry Fitzgerald in possession receivers, Mark Bell in the bench press, Usain Bolt in the sprints.
Sound the mic and talking shit.
There's nothing uncontroversial about that because it's objective. Look how much you've bench pressed.
Right.
So why then would there be such a divergence? Who could argue that there's plausibility in having such a divergence in how you treat yourself day to day, the importance that you place on your preparation compared to Usain Bolt or Larry Fitzgerald or Steph Curry or any of these people? Because in principle, if you're operating in the elite domain of your discipline, then you should share the commonalities that we find if we compare all those other individuals.
Right.
So even though Usain Bolt, the greatest Olympic sprinter of all time, has made it public knowledge that he loves chicken McNuggets, how naive would we be to
associate that with his speed,
the whole of his preparation?
But not if everybody ate chicken nuggets. If Steph Curry's eating chicken nuggets and Mark Bell's eating chicken nuggets, there might be something going on with some chicken nuggets.
It might be a trend.
And again, hence the reason why there's been the masses of individuals, the lemmings let off the cliff for reasons not steeped in quality explanation.
Correlation versus causation
exactly
issues.
Correct.
Yeah.
But you put it to me very simply. This is the third time I tore my pec. I've torn one side twice, and you put it in simple terms of, it's just time to do something different. Like you're doing a similar thing, and you're good at acquiring the strength, and you're good at going out there and doing it. But the way at which you do it needs to at least slightly change, so we don't end up with the same result again. We don't end up with a pec tear again.
It's a really resonant way to say it. I think everybody can identify with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's like, okay, well, you're just kind of doing the same goddamn thing.
It seems to be that in my experience, most individuals, regardless of sport, are not particularly interested nor willing to do what's necessary logistically to have the time to really devote a sufficient analysis to the way that they think and acquire knowledge about the subject matter.
Right.
And like who knows how many other people.
Yeah, like for me, it's not going to be without resistance that I'm going to accept something. I will accept it, and I will. I think the greatest power that you can have as a coach is recognizing when you're wrong, or when you're off slightly, or when you misjudge something. And I don't have a problem doing that, but initially I do. You know what I mean? So initially I'll be like, well, fuck that. I want to keep doing shit my way because it's what I'm comfortable with. But once I think through it a little bit more, then I'm like, fucking guy's right.
Well, ultimately it comes down to explanation.
Right.
If it's a good explanation, it is intrinsically and by definition hard to vary. And so anyone willing to think objectively must accept it, if nothing else, as a platform from which to discuss further. A lack of objectivity and reason is the emotional response of, oh, the hell with this.
Right.
There's nothing logical about that type of response.
And it doesn't help.
It's not helpful. And so no one is wise to simply do something different for the sake of being different. But if a sufficient analysis has been provided, has been utilized in examining, well, what have you been doing? And then based upon how that adds up to what is knowable, then a good explanation is given as to, you know what, we need to do things differently. And the reason is one in which this is explained well and hard to vary, then that's something that serves as a viable means of conversation, at the minimum.
Let's give people a little bit of insight as to what it is you have me doing with this pec tear. Let's first dive into, you have me doing something called strength aerobics. What is that, and why is that of value?
So that comes from the late Russian sports scientist Yuri Voroshansky, who outlined a few different methods of utilizing the aerobic machinery as a contributing participant in the process of strength development.
Can you define aerobics? What is that?
So
in this case,
aerobic or oxidative qualities of muscle tissue defines that tissue's capacity to oxidize the requisite biochemical substrates, depending on what we're talking about, fats, glucose, in order to mitigate the onset of acidosis and what becomes positive hydrogen ion accumulation resultant of lactate accumulation, et cetera, et cetera. So one mode of achieving improvements in strength is available by way of what's aerobically demanding, and we, the names of these things are not nearly as important as to what's happening.
Right.
Despite how popular it is to have catchphrases and
buzzwords.
I mean, because even squat, bench press, deadlift has no clinical relevance.
Right.
People only understand that because someone showed them. See that movement there, the hips, the knees, the back, the ankles. We call that a squat, but not because it's the biomechanical definition of it.
I like the naming of dogs and stuff like that too. They have certain actual names, and then there's it's called a pit bull.
The species, and
it's a different, right?
And so, strength aerobics in the way that I'm having you do the movements is with quite lightweight, and the reason, because you don't have to you can use heavier percentages of the maximum and qualify as strength aerobic method, but that wouldn't be appropriate because of the injury that you're dealing with. And so the reason why we're using a lower percentage is because what's unequivocally been shown relevant in a variety of viable researches has been the implications of the slow muscle lengthening on the remodeling of damaged muscle tissue.
Slow muscle lengthening, going slow during the lowering portion, eccentric portion of the lift.
Is this something like Louis Simmons talks about doing higher repetitions, possibly lighter weights? We're talking 30s, 40s, 50s, helping some ligaments and tendon
ultra
strength?
high rep, time dumbbell presses.
Yes, however, consistent with this particular method, you are not fully extending the joints.
So time under tension type deal, bodybuilder style?
That's correct. And slow lowering and slow raising. So the general rule is 3 to 4 seconds with an upper body arm movement.
Yeah, it sucks.
4 to 6 seconds with a lower body.
So it's tempo training.
And so it's
Tempo training.
It's low load, but it's the tension gets there because of the time that you're doing this.
The tension was identical. When I got to 30 reps with 195 yesterday, or 175, it was brutal.
And again, the purpose is to. It's not only one. Part of it involves remodeling. The other is developing a specific oxidative capacity in a way that is relevant. So coming back to who's the fittest.
So conditioning kind of being a factor in strength,
well,
in a certain sense.
So that word misleads a lot of people. Conditioning, as common as it is, it means one thing in bodybuilding.
Yeah, it's specific, yeah.
Yeah.
It means another thing in sport training.
Well, and it's something different even in powerlifting than it is the marathon running.
I guess you can say the same with flexibility.
Circulatory efficiency, or
Well, it's conditioning is simply an action verb consistent with preparation. They can be used interchangeably. Improperly, it's been used in a way improperly in sport.
Aerobic capacity.
And that's specific. So the question is, well, what do we mean when we use the word? Because you have to replace it with preparation. Oh, we're doing preparation today. What does that mean?
You should be doing that every day.
Well, that's what anything
Preparing
is.
for everything.
Yeah.
And so that should be rethought. Whoever termed the phrase strength and conditioning clearly was troubled with the grammar.
And while we're at it,
Strength and preparation.
Let's get rid of
Which
the
doesn't
name
make sense either.
Good morning, because it's not. There's nothing good about it. It's not fun. It's not something you want to do first thing.
And
in
we
the
often
morning.
don't do it in the morning.
Yeah, and it hurts. Painful.
Precisely.
and it doesn't make the next morning any better.
Bad
either,
weeks.
So what does it mean to be fit to be a power lifter? What does it mean to be fit to be an offensive lineman?
Yeah.
To be a 3-meter springboard diver in the Olympics? What it means is different things. Because what Yuri Vorshansky, who I credited with the strength aerobic, he also spoke in great depth, this is decades ago, about what the anaerobic threshold really is. And it's a local process specific to the oxidative capacity of the muscles involved in the work. So this is why there's so many ways to criticize. The reason for wrestlers and boxers and MMA guys out there running miles, it has no specific relevance to what is necessary to be fit for on the mat, in the cage, in the octagon, in the ring, etc. Similarly, for a powerlifter, if we think of, well, what do powerlifters do? Do they walk with a sled behind them? Do they walk around the block? Do they try running? Do they try swimming? Well, what is that accomplishing? How does it relate to the competitive result? And so there's this continuum of just general fitness in terms of cardiovascular efficiency, cardiac efficiency and recuperation, just general fitness. If we say, you know what, it doesn't matter what you're doing, we should all be able to walk up a few flight of stairs without being concerned about needing a paramedic at the top.
Right.
So that's sort of, okay, that's general fitness. But as we become more specific, how does one argue the relevance, despite the predominance of it, of team sport athletes running gassers? And the thing is, no one with knowledge can offer a good explanation for that one, despite its prevalence. And so similarly...
Is there any, from a mental standpoint, of, like, I'm trying to kick these guys in the ass, or is that not anything that enters your mind?
Mental preparedness opposed to
just
physical
like, hey, you
preparedness.
know what, I'm going to make these kids fucking tougher than some of the other kids.
So tough is an illusion.
Okay.
Mental toughness is science fiction. It was actually explained quite well in what in my view is a good movie with Denzel Washington, Man on Fire, where he's describing to the small girl in the pool.
We went from Yuri singing to Denzel.
Yes.
I love it. But
He likes Jason Bourne a lot too. A lot of references.
There's a lot of great
now
examples.
you're talking our language. What'd you learn from Will Ferrell? Nothing. Son of a bitch.
That Jay Farrow does an incredible impression of him.
It's true.
There's no such thing as tough. You're trained or untrained. So here's the example that I use.
Makes sense.
If we take what most people think of via the improper use of the word, as common as it is, tough or toughness or mental toughness, what do you think of? And so here's an example. Let's take an ultimate fighting champion, and let's take a Navy SEAL. So two individuals of many, but these are gross examples, that you wouldn't find many individuals who like to throw around the word. They wouldn't be very resistant to saying, well, yeah, do you have to be tough? Do you have to be mentally tough to be a Navy SEAL?
Yeah, you would never say they're mentally weak.
Right? Well, so now we say, well, what does that mean? Well, we can measure the human body's physiological response that renders a reaction quite the opposite of what most people associate with toughness. So if your blood pressure is through the roof and your perspiration and your respiration and you're on the border of having a panic attack, that is not a synonym for toughness. Mm-hmm. So we've agreed that the UFC champion and the Navy SEAL they must be tough individuals and mentally tough. But what happens if now we're measuring? So this is objective truth here, not subjective. Galvanic skin response, heart rate, blood pressure, perspiration, etc. The physiological modes that say, okay, this person is not focused and calm, they're having a panic attack. Mm-hmm. Focused and calm is, I don't use the words, but if I was made to, that's tough. But it isn't actually, it's trained. So we take these two individuals and we're monitoring their physiological responses as one enters the octagon, as one is on getting ready to jump out of a plane at 33,000 feet in the middle of the night with full night vision. And because that's what they do, their physiological state will be much closer to what would objectively be viewed as focused than the random person being thrust into the octagon.
We had a guy come on our show, Tony. His name on Instagram, Real World Tactical. That's how we know him. But he talked in a very similar way, that he's like training himself for these, crazy moments. Someone comes in here and shoots the place up, and he, calmly ducks down and finds out where the enemy is, essentially, and takes care of the situation.
Is some of that, though, I don't know, genetic or nature? Because, the term, gamer, there's some kids that have played basketball for 10 years, but in practice are crushing you. You put them in a game, they still suck. So, that by definition or whatever, is mentally weak. You can't put it on when it's time to put it on.
So everything is identifiable. So we'll table that for a moment. And So say we switch the two. So now we take the MMA guy, and we put him with the 80-pound pack and night vision, and he's getting ready to be thrown out of the plane at 33,000 feet. And we take the SEAL, and he's with 3-ounce gloves, and he's with his board shorts, and he's in there facing whoever. And we're still monitoring their physiological state almost unequivocally. Each of them is going to demonstrate the opposite of what most people think of as toughness.
There you go. Yeah, that makes sense.
Even though he's a Navy SEAL and he's been in X amount of firefights and bullets flying.
He's out of his element.
It's training. Training is inoculation. So what do we do if we're going to certain countries in Africa, deep into the jungle? We inoculate ourselves smartly against yellow fever and et cetera, et cetera. And that's all anything. All these words are synonymous. They're synonyms. Inoculation, preparation, training, So if you're inoculated effectively, then you are prepared for the task at hand. And it's a summation of all these different variables that I outlined earlier, culture, psychology, et cetera. So psychological preparation is in line with effective training. And it is a misnomer. Oh, this individual is so tough. There's so this. that's a lack of relevant vocabulary that's really misleading, because then everybody else adopts the word, and you're not actually describing what's happening. Examples. Say you're really resilient, you have a great deal of resolve in terms of being unaffected by setbacks, but that's it. There's no particular overcoming qualities. Well, now you're that individual who just really takes an ass whipping and gets back up but doesn't do anything. Right. Alternatively, let's say you're really tenacious and aggressive but not resilient, do not possess resolve, so you can give it but you can't take it. So we have to use the specific language in terms of what we're seeing from an individual, and be very specific about, we're seeing a lot of resiliency and resolve out of this individual, and that's the reason they're able to withstand such physical abuse. And from this other one, we really see a resilient, tenacious, aggressive individual, not particularly strong in the areas of resilience and resolve, and that's why we see, if they're not carrying the forward momentum, that there's not as strong of a result. This is relevant knowledge that in my view, you have to be in charge of any type of sports operation, and it is not understood on the wholesale. It's not a prerequisite for qualification. And so, again, man on fire, Denzel Washington, there's no such thing as tough. You're trained or untrained. That's it. That's the reason why you can walk seemingly unaffected, for instance, into the octagon and be similarly unaffected on the precipice of a really volatile combat mission, and look like that's that person's job. And we could fill in a list of professionals that are similar representations. The hedge fund broker who's dealing with 12-figure deals in Wall Street, and the trauma surgeon in an emergency room in a really volatile city. All these individuals must be focused under pressure. So much of the words that are used in common discourse are really misleading. Toughness, stress, these are not the right words to use. There are falsities, chosen afflictions that really deserve to be further discussed, explanations provided, so that so many people are not walking around so misinformed.
We tend to think of somebody who's tough in one situation as being able to be tough in any situation, and that's just a fallacy for the most part.
Well, I would argue in your example, though, the SEAL would have a better chance because of his training, I guess. I guess that's maybe more specific to training still. But, yeah, he's going to have a better chance in that fucking ring and be less nervous than that UFC fighter. And maybe that's just randomly the examples you chose.
Probably, if you were to poll the populations.
That UFC, but I guess it all goes back to experience, because maybe that random UFC fighter loves jumping out of planes.
Indeed. It's exactly right. So it's simply So the question as to what population is most likely to demonstrate focus under pressure, regardless of the circumstance, the answer to that is the percentage of the population who's deemed it important to be focused under pressure in a lot of different circumstances.
We had a UFC fighter here just the other day, and his opponent in his next fight is not somebody that he can actually watch a lot of film on, so he has no real idea how to prepare for the guy, but he works out with one of the best, or maybe the best team, with a lot of very, very strong individuals. And so he said, I'm confident going into this fight because probably what I faced in practice is harder than what I'm going to encounter in the ring.
So there's a certain merit, in military special operations. The more we sweat in training, the less we bleed in war. This is a common notion in different types of preparation that typically involves physical exertion, whether it's military preparation or some sport or otherwise. However, there's only so much that you can know about opponent decision making, and to steep yourself in unknown is an unwise use of time. So clearly you know what is knowable, you collect what is collectible, you study what is studyable, but in whether it's that fighter's situation or any other, what you, without debate, are able to capitalize upon are the substrates of mixed martial arts. And this is what must always be the objective in the preparation of mixed martial arts, which is the technical foundation which is necessary to execute the objective that's specific to that individual's attributes, and so on and so forth. And I had a similar conversation with an NFL head coach answering a similar question about what's often viewed as sort of the how do we solve the problem of the dynamic complexity about what the opponent's going to do.
Yeah, but kind of a kid thing, right? Worry about yourself, not others.
So
if you're good enough at your offense, you don't have to worry about their defense as much.
So there's truth in that, and the real task at hand is what is attainable to accomplish in preparation, and how can we capitalize upon these factors, which always will bring us back to what's the difference between what's knowable and actually known.
Well, and then prioritize. I think on this topic, like there's basketball coaches that'll try to we're running defense and we're going to try to play out exactly every play they're going to do and how we're going to defend it, or we just get better at fucking team defense and not worry about it. We'll figure it out during the game.
Well, and then to that, we'd take a look at what do we mean when we talk about team defense?
Yeah.
And it's getting to the substrates of
communication or whatever. Yeah.
It's ironic because when I consult with individuals, you speak about these things in such a way that are at the bedrock of importance. They're largely irrefutable, and they seem so obvious.
Yeah.
There's again the resistance isn't whether it seems viable or not. It's no one's done this. I haven't done it before. I can't believe that. That's the dynamic of recognition. But I'm essentially never encountered with, oh, well, that's not true. Oh, well, that's not right. That doesn't arise because I've put so much time and energy into
It's hard to argue.
Yeah. Similarly to, as to the reasons why, no one's going to argue that if I drop this, it falls down to the floor. It doesn't matter how you feel about it and whether you know anything about it, because it's dropping every time until something really different happens in the physics of the Earth is off its
Gravity
axis
is still
and everything
gravity.
else. And so similarly, if you really strive for what's fundamental and therefore more irrefutable, regardless if it's controversial or not, then you're really on course with having some paradigm shifting. So going to the bedrock of what does it mean? What does it mean to be tactically prepared, to be technically prepared, to have good defense? What do you mean when we say these words? The general public would probably be surprised to know that type of questioning and dialogue and real cognitive energy put into solving the problems is not done at the highest levels. And the reason why at the highest levels, because if we have the most genetically gifted, let's say lifters or football players or water polo players, going back to what we talked about earlier, if it's simply that it was in the cards for them to achieve results because of what they achieved from their parents and they worked diligently, they're going to achieve some level of success in spite of so many of these other things that are so easy to criticize if you have the knowledge.
Yeah, there's so many different things to do, right? You can't fuck them all up, I guess. I have a question here from our homie, Amadeo Novella, who works locally with some UFC fighters. He's a fan of yours, and he basically kind of says, with so many advances in sports science becoming more accessible to coaches, Omega Wave, Catapult, velocity-based tools, has the industry or quality of athlete progressed, or are we just tinkering with so much data that the art of coaching has taken a hit? How do you envision the next 5 years being?
I think that's kind of like the question I asked earlier. Like, is it necessary? Like, are these athletes improving, or do we just know more about these athletes?
All good questions, and certainly complicated answers.
Yeah.
As to what I envision, what I hope to see is apart from what I envision, because what I envision is is going to be based upon the way things have been effectively unchanged since their inception. And the reason for that, as I've explained in other formats, is sport as a profession is very, very new. Even the sports that have been around the longest, if we go back to football, not to be confused with American football.
Soccer, Aztecs, kicking heads around.
Rugby, these sports that began in terms of sort of globally recognized people doing them, even if at an amateur level in the 1800s, in the late 1800s. It wasn't until between the NFL was 1920 formalized, but we're looking at absolutely less than 100 years. Now, on the scale of a human life, that seems significant because most people don't live that long. But in the scale of human history, it's a blip. Comparatively, the realms of science and medicine and astronomy have been around for thousands of years. So that which can be assimilated from what has long since existed and by comparison evolved to a much higher degree has failed to enter. And so to answer Amadeo's question, I don't expect much to change. I'm hopeful that a vast amount will change. In this book, I know to my small audience, they're aware that I've been talking about it for some time. When I'm done with it, I hope and I'm optimistic that it will serve as a catalyst to impart the change, because the emergence of what Amadeo referenced in terms of sports scientific discovery and institution into the higher performing organizations and the diagnostic machinery, et cetera, they're useful tools. So what has happened is, until their emergence, which is technological advances, it's sort of analogous to the carpenters before they had power tools. So no one's going to refute the utility of power tools, but that's not really what's in question here. It's the acumen of the carpenter, and that's where the knowledge comes to bear. And so for me, it's much less. I've never been of financial means to have anything particularly expensive in terms of technology or diagnostic tools, so I have no direct experience with much of what is available in terms of measuring this or that. And the reality is they're simply tools that can be used effectively, but if the practitioner has the knowledge. So no different than the potential of a handgun sitting there. It is equally as innocuous as this playing card, because if untouched by a human, it might sit there until the end of time, at least the end of human life. And so in principle, it's really a question of what's going to be done with it. So again, to Amadeo, it depends what is done with the information that is available. There is an enormous amount of available information that could drastically change the way everyone currently involved in sport thinks about sport preparation. I'm writing what's going to amount to be about a 500-page book that talks about all of this. So it's possible to change. The question, if it will,
Since you and I've met, I feel that there's been quite a few changes. I remember, like, even just back around the time we met, I mean, there was still static stretching was real prevalent. And you've seen, I mean, it may not have, been wiped out across the whole United States or whatever, but you see more of a dynamic warm-up, and you're seeing some changes with some of the athletes. So do you think, through, I think Elite FTS was a part of that. I think with some of the coaching and some of the information they had online. What do you think is a solve to get things to continue to change? I mean, you mentioned writing a book. You just have to have more critical thinkers that are coaches, or
there has to be knowledge acquired from disciplines that are what on paper and to the conventional mind far removed from sport training. The current
from things that are older.
The current curriculums that exist, to certify somebody in something or some coaching education in a sports skill they're very narrow and myopic in terms of relying upon received wisdom and dogma that existed prior, and this is the strategy used by so-and-so who won 5 championships in 5 years, void of good explanation, void of actual knowledge. And so that is what must be imparted into the problem solving. And if and when it is, there will be changes on the scale of, unforeseen possibilities.
Right.
And we're talking about the top level of sport. Think about what it's going to take to implement change all the way down to, high school Pop Warner football.
PE teachers.
PE teachers.
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, it's a less daunting task because the economics associated are insignificant.
Yeah.
Whereas if some PE teacher is listening to this, there's much less interfering with his thought process of say contacting me and saying, man, that's really interesting. Could you tell me more about that? Because he's not at the helm of a $4 billion professional
It's not
sport
as big
operation.
a ship to turn, yeah.
And so I encountered that when Mark and I first met. I was coaching at the high school level. I was a track coach, and I was doing the physical preparation with the American football team. And because of that dynamic I just described, the head coach and the coordinators were completely, I had their attention. And so what I've termed as program management or global load management, I was doing from my very first year of coaching, because it just so happened to be that when I went to the whiteboard and I began to talk, now let's think about practice this way and do this thing on practice on this day and switch what you've been doing here to this other day so that it aligns with everything that is done to prepare. It was very well received. Yet when I've done that on other levels, higher on the economic food chain, this is historically, there was more, I felt like I was talking to a wall in terms of what was received and actually put into practice. And so this bodes further relevance towards my contention that in many cases, though they currently are, many head coaches are not qualified to hold that position, according to the way that I would define it, which is far removed from anything that we would discuss specifically to what happens in a weight room and why.
That makes sense. Yeah. There's less at stake for a high school coach than there is an NFL coach.
Yeah. And even more importantly, because of the way these circles operate, what I work to achieve is to have this type of conversation with an owner, with an executive.
So they're setting a tone.
So now you actually have knowledge of this business you're involved in, and even though it might just be play money for you because you're a billionaire in for some other reason, and you felt like having a sports team, that's fine. But wouldn't you want to have the most viable money-making sports team you can have?
Yeah, most of them, I think there's an ego thing. They want to win, too, right? I mean, why not? Why would you be involved in something that was going to be a perennial loser?
No question. And for that reason, what owner is going to refute the idea that this is really important knowledge to have, and based upon the knowledge that you have, that's going to determine the rest of this organization that you form, who's hired, and on the basis of what and what they know.
James works with some of the cream of the crop athletes and coaches and organizations in the world. You can find him at what's your website?
athleteconsulting.net and globalsportconcepts.net.
And I met James in 2005. James reached out to me when I was moving to the area, and he and I got together. I was a coach locally with a football team, and I knew very little when it came to being a coach of that nature. So I went up and I saw him and saw what you were doing with the kids, and took a lot of notes and took a lot of that information and applied it. Since I know nothing about running, it was really useful information to be able to give to the kids and stuff like that. And James is a super knowledgeable person. He has been a critical thinker from day one. Since I've met him, he's been the same dude. So anybody out there listening to it that needs that next level of consulting, look him up, check him out. And you have a Twitter account as well?
The Thinker Smith.
And the IG, he's working on the Instagram thing. He's not sure how to figure it out. He's got the BlackBerry, so it's it's a process. But maybe before he leaves, we'll work towards creating something. He's somebody who's currently helping me with the mission to bench press 600 pounds and to get this monkey off my back of tearing my pec. Although tearing my pec has made me a millionaire, so I shouldn't complain about it too much. Anyway, that's all the time we got for now. Multiply your hustle, multiply your muscle, and may all your shits be tapered later.
Thanks to all our sponsors, 8Man Strong Apparel at 8Man Strong, bodybuilding.com for all your supplement needs, Urban Ice Organics to connect your mind and body at naturalorganics with an X.com, increase your bench, howmuchyoubench.net, Power, the only strength magazine available in digital and print at thepowermagazine.com, and I'm Silent Mike, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube.
Oh, wait, I almost forgot. I've got one quick question. How do you get stronger? Just real quick. How do I get stronger?
On that note, I'm Jim McD, STTV. Everywhere that I would want you to find me. Follow this show on Instagram. We are at Mark Bell's PowerCast, and we are out.
Later.
Mark Bell's PowerCast is a production of supertraining.tv.